By the time my best friend pushed me into the street, the zombies had already learned how to open doors. And I knew that. That's the part that will haunt me forever. I knew that, and I trusted the wrong people anyway. The drug was already in my blood. Jane had put it in my coffee, bitter and subtle, the way Jane did everything. And my legs were cement, and my thoughts were arriving 3 seconds late. And the world had this strange underwater quality that might have been peaceful if I wasn't falling, if the barricade at the end of the block wasn't coming apart, if the street wasn't suddenly full of the worst things I had ever seen in my life coming directly toward me at full speed. Let me tell you what they looked like, because people always get this wrong. They didn't look dead. They looked wrong, rebuilt with different priorities. The man in the orange construction vest who cleared the burning car in a single leap, you could still see the shape of the person he'd been, still there, still recognizable, but his eyes had been replaced with something with no interest in any of that history. Just direction, just hunger, just the terrible forward momentum of something that had shed everything unnecessary. Their skin was wrong, gray in places, darkened in others. One was missing an arm below the elbow and didn't slow down, didn't even seem to notice the stump swinging in rhythm with its stride. That detail is the one I still see when I close my eyes. And they were fast, not horror movie fast, athlete fast. The kind of speed that means every second between you and them is a second you have to earn. I had no seconds left. My heart was doing something I had never felt it do before. Not racing exactly, more like stuttering, like it was trying to process too many things simultaneously and kept losing its place. The asphalt was cold under my palms where I'd fallen. The smoke from the burning car was thick enough to taste. And somewhere underneath the terror, something small and completely out of place surfaced for just a moment. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen, the yellow curtains, the smell of whatever she was always cooking on Sunday mornings, something with onions and something sweet underneath the onions. I was 7 years old, and the world had not yet shown me what it was actually capable of, and I was sitting at that kitchen table in the particular safety of a place that loves you. The thought lasted maybe 1 second. Then the zombies were 10 feet away, and my knee buckled, and I understood with complete clarity that I was going to die here. And underneath the fear, underneath the fear, was something almost worse than fear. Disappointment in myself. Because I was Ruth Valen. I had bankrupted men who thought they were untouchable. I had dismantled criminal empires without entering a single room they occupied. I had outthought, outmaneuvered, and outlasted every threat my world had produced for 27 years. And I had not seen Jane coming. That was the part that broke something in me, even as the rest of me was breaking. Not the teeth in my shoulder, though that came a second later, white-hot and total and final. Not the weight of them landing on me, not the sound they made, low and rhythmic and utterly without mercy. The part that broke me was simpler. I had loved her. I had trusted her. I had handed her 20 years of the realest thing I had in me. And she had been planning this for long enough that when she finally did it, her voice didn't even shake. "You were never meant to be the queen," she said from the doorway. Not shouted, said. The way you say something you've been rehearsing so long, it has stopped feeling like words and started feeling like a fact. I went down. And my last sight, the absolute last thing before the darkness, was Jane, stepping backward into the doorway. Her lips were moving around the sentence that would follow me into whatever came next. I refuse to kneel to a gutter-born survivor. Then nothing. Not darkness, nothing. The way nothing actually is, not an absence you experience, just the end of experiencing. But I came back, and I remembered every single name. 6 weeks before the first official case was announced, I was moving through the warehouse district at 4 a.m. with a clipboard, a forged access badge, and a very clear sense of what the next 8 months were going to cost. The loading dock was empty except for a night supervisor named Gerald who had been underpaid for 11 years and knew exactly which manifests his manager never checked. I knew this because I had spent 2 weeks learning Gerald, his coffee order, his route, the way he talked about his daughter's tuition with the particular exhaustion of someone doing the math every morning and coming up short. I knew Gerald the way I knew everyone I needed, completely, specifically, and in ways they never knew I knew. He waved me through without looking up. I had 3 hours before the shift change. I wasn't a good person. Get that straight before you start rooting for me. I was not the charming criminal with the golden heart. I was not misunderstood. I was exactly what I appeared to be. Precise, ruthless, effective, and pointed, for most of my life, entirely at my own survival and advancement. I called myself a logistics architect. Supply chain consulting, officially. Accurate, incomplete. What I actually understood, earlier than almost anyone in my world, violence is the most expensive tool in the box. It's loud, it creates witnesses, it generates enemies who have nothing left to lose. The real weapon is flow. Money flow, information flow, supply flow. You find the right vein, apply the right pressure, the body bleeds itself, and you are never in the room when it happens. I thought about that as I walked the dock that night, counting crates, making notes in a shorthand no one else could read. At 21, I had bankrupted a shipping magnate this way. Not with threats, just attention. 3 weeks of real dinners with dock workers, listening to grievances that had been ignored for years. Helped them organize a slowdown. His credit line collapsed 4 months later. He never knew my name. At 23, 2 rival gangs destroyed each other on my schedule. I rerouted a weapons shipment so it arrived in one gang's territory looking like a gift from the other. Both sides crippled inside a month. I absorbed their distribution networks for a fraction of what building new ones would have cost. At 25, a contamination report I wrote at a kitchen table. 48 hours, one competitor's stock down 31% by morning. At 27, a trafficking syndicate dismantled without a single physical confrontation. Forensic accounting, frozen assets, severed fuel supply. 48 hours. Done. I walked the length of the warehouse that night, the ring warm and quiet against my sternum, and I took inventory of everything I'd need. I was building the same kind of architecture I'd always built. Pressure points, flow, the right vein at the right moment. The difference was that this time, the system I was dismantling was the end of the world. Cold, I know. I'm not here for absolution. I'm here for accuracy. Because the machine I was, the way I moved through systems and found their weak points, that machine is why any of what comes next was possible. Before any of that, a flood. I was 10 years old. We lived in the kind of neighborhood built in places where water eventually wins. Close to a river, near a levee that had been quietly failing for a decade, while the people responsible for it lived somewhere it couldn't reach them. It gave way at 3 a.m. I'm not going to walk you through the whole night. Some things you keep. I lost my parents in the first hour, my uncle in the second, a dog named Potato. My cousin was 6. She'd chosen it. We'd all accepted it because 6-year-olds say some things with a certainty that makes arguing feel wrong. My grandmother pulled me out by my arm. 63 years old. She got me to a rooftop, and she held me there. Both of us soaking, both of us shaking in the deep way that isn't temperature. And she didn't say it would be okay. She was too honest for that. She just held on. Before the boats came, she took a thin silver ring off her own hand and looped it on a cord around my neck. "Never lose this," she said, "even if the world burns." Plain silver, small engraving on the inside in a language I couldn't read. I wore it for the next 27 years without removing it once. My grandmother died 2 years after the flood. Pneumonia. Her lungs never recovered from the night in the water. I was 12 years old at the graveside in shoes that didn't fit, and I understood, standing there, that I was alone in a way that had a new texture to it now. Not temporary, structural. The ring was the only thing I had left that remembered who I was before. But I need to tell you something else about the ring, something I told no one, not even Jane. The first time it happened, I was 19, 2 years out of the flood, still raw, still building the walls that would eventually become my architecture. I was cornered, genuinely cornered, the kind of situation that happens when you're young and desperate and making your first real moves in a world that does not forgive mistakes. I was on a fire escape in the dark, out of options, doing the arithmetic of someone who has run out of exits. Then the ring grew warm against my chest, not fever hot, something underneath heat, a warmth from inside the metal, and the air beside me opened, just slightly, just for a second, and I smelled something, fertile soil, green things, something alive and unhurried in a way nothing in my life was alive and unhurried. Then it closed. I sat on that fire escape for a long time afterward. I told myself I was exhausted, told myself it was stress, told myself a lot of things. The second time, I was 24, walking through a hospital where I was conducting surveillance on a target. I passed the pediatric oncology ward. Through the glass, a girl, maybe 8, sitting up in her bed with tubes in her arms and a drawing of a sun taped to the wall above her. She was looking directly at me. She had the eyes of someone who had already learned that the world was capable of things she hadn't asked for. The ring went warm the moment I saw her, not urgent, tender almost, a pulse against my sternum that felt like something trying to tell me something I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. I kept walking. I finished the job. I told myself I didn't know what it meant. The third time, 6 months before the outbreak, I was sitting alone in my apartment at 2 a.m., going through supply chain reports, when the ring's warmth intensified to something I'd never felt, a sustained burn, the engraving on the inside suddenly warm enough to feel through my shirt. I pulled it out. In the low light of my desk lamp, the silver looked different, alive. The letters of the engraving briefly clear, as though lit from within. I held it for 10 minutes, waiting. Hey, you're still here. If this story is resonating with you and you haven't subscribed yet, taking a second to do so really helps me keep creating stories like this. All right, let's get back to it. But for the first time, the warmth felt less like a comfort and more like a warning, like something preparing, like a clock that had just started running. 3 months later, I died in the street. And when I came back, the ring cracked open the world and showed me what was inside it. 8 months into the outbreak, 2 a.m., the operations center was quiet except for the hum of servers and the occasional radio crackle from the perimeter teams. Everyone else had gone to get a few hours of sleep. I was at my desk working through intercepted communications, the usual sweep of black market chatter, disinformation networks, the slow taxonomy of people trying to profit from catastrophe. Then her name came up in a transcript. Jane Westhall, flagged by 3 separate monitoring systems. I opened the file and sat with it for a long time before I could make myself read it. I have rewritten this section 4 times, trying to make her simple. She isn't. She wasn't. And if I simplify her, I'm lying, and this whole account stops being worth anything. Jane was born into money so established it had stopped feeling like money and started feeling like gravity, the natural condition of existence, the thing that organized everything else. Private tutors, boarding school across 3 countries, a father with board seats at 2 banks, and a defense contractor who spoke about legacy the way other people speak about oxygen. Her father got caught. Corruption, the elaborate, many-layered kind that ends with a room full of powerful people deciding who they can most afford to sacrifice. He became the sacrifice. Jane, 19 years old, ended up in a situation I won't describe in detail. What I will say is that it was the furthest distance imaginable from everything she had been raised to expect. I found her. I pulled her out. It cost me significant money, several relationships I'd spent years cultivating, and one favor I had been holding for a genuine emergency. I did it because she was in danger, and because I recognized something in her, a fierce, humiliated pride that I understood on a cellular level. What I didn't understand was what being rescued by me meant to her. I scrolled through the transcript. Her voice, even in text, even filtered through an intercepted frequency, was immediately recognizable. That particular cadence, the way she built an argument, the way she used to build a room, everything placed, nothing accidental. To Jane, I had always been a category error made flesh. I was from a flooded neighborhood and a dead family and a criminal underworld, and I had ended up, through survival instinct and refusal and sheer grinding will, in a position to save her. I had inverted the natural order by existing the way I existed. She could never fully forgive me for that. I don't think she ever knew she needed to. She loved me. I keep returning to that because it's the part that makes everything else more painful, not less. She genuinely loved me. We were each other's closest thing to family for 20 years. There was real warmth, real loyalty, real history, real sisterhood. And underneath all of it, like a structural crack that only shows when the weight gets heavy enough, she believed I was beneath her. People are built for exactly that kind of contradiction. She never said it openly, she was too intelligent for that, but it lived in the pauses, in certain silences. Always just enough distance. She was waiting, I think, for the world to correct itself, to put her back above me where she believed she belonged. I read to the end of the transcript, then I closed it, opened the distribution projections I'd been working on before it came in, and kept moving. The apocalypse had looked like her opportunity. Now I understood what she intended to do with it. I woke up in my own bed, with my own coffee cup on my nightstand, cold and skinned over from the night before. 3 months before the outbreak. I sat completely still for a long time, checked my shoulder. No wound, no scar, completely intact. Then the ring started burning. Not heat, something underneath heat, a warmth from inside the metal, pulsing against my sternum in a steady rhythm that slowly, deliberately stopped matching my heartbeat and established its own. Something that had decided to announce itself, something that had been building toward this for a long time. I pulled the ring out. It was glowing, the deep orange of coals in their last moment before dark. The engraving on the inside was lit from within, and though I still couldn't read the language, I understood it completely, the way you understand things that bypass language entirely. Preservation. The space appeared like a layer underneath this world, not above it, not beside it, but beneath it. Same coordinates, unreachable from the outside, invisible to everyone except me, but real in a way I felt in my back teeth and my sternum and somewhere behind my eyes. Fertile land that stretched further than I could see, orchards in full fruit, not one season's worth, every season simultaneously, blossoms and ripened fruit on the same branch, abundance that didn't follow any logic I recognized. Fields of medicinal crops in long, careful rows, a river running clean and cold through the center of it, livestock in the distance, I could hear them before I saw them, that particular settling sound of animals that have never been afraid. A sun and moon on their own independent schedule, keeping time by different rules. The spring was at the center. Water so clear it looked like a different substance entirely, not liquid so much as the physical form of transparency. When I reached toward it, the warmth in the ring increased, leaning toward it the way a compass needle leans toward north. The rules arrived without words, just understood, completely and immediately. The spring was finite. Overuse would cost me physically, hemorrhage, blackouts, damage that accumulated and didn't fully reverse. The water needed processing before it could cure. It required time and science and careful mediation, and it only worked against this specific viral strain. 3 months. I had a head start that no one else alive had. I sat in that apartment until noon, holding the ring in both hands, thinking about Jane, about what it would have meant to tell her, about all the ways she could have helped, about all the ways, and this is the part that takes the breath out of me even now, I had already been protecting this from her without fully understanding why. Some part of me had always known. I didn't call her. I called the first precinct instead, then the second, then the third. The third one gave me a laminated pamphlet about mental wellness with a small illustration of a person sitting peacefully near a window. I was standing in that third parking lot when a car pulled up and a man stepped out. I knew his face before he said a word. I keep files on everyone in my operational radius. It's habit, reflex, the thing that keeps you alive. Noah Ardent, 29, Academy valedictorian, 2 commendations, a warehouse fire where he went in against protocol and pulled 2 people out, and a missing persons case every other investigator had administratively closed. Clean record, no leverage over him, which had always put him in the category of people I couldn't use, and therefore rarely thought about. Except that 2 months ago, building the distribution network, needing someone on the law enforcement side, someone who could deviate from procedure when procedure wasn't enough, I had pulled his file back out, sat with it for a week, almost approached him, decided I wasn't ready, closed it again. He had a face built for steadiness, not the absence of feeling, but the decision to govern it. He looked at me like he'd been looking for something and wasn't yet sure if this was it. "Ruth Valen," he said. "I know who you are. Start from the beginning." I told him everything. He sat completely still. When I finished, he was quiet for long enough that most people would have filled the silence. He didn't. "Evidence," he said. "Without it, you're just a criminal predicting chaos." I picked up the coffee cup between us and moved it to my dimensional space. The air where it had been was just air. I watched Noah's face work through several explanations and run out of all of them. I brought it back. "Do that again," he said. I did it 3 more times. His pen, his badge, his watch. Each time, the attempt to rationalize, the failure, the quiet recalibration. "Why are you here?" he said finally. "With this, you survive anything alone. So why?" I took a breath. "Because alone is what I've been," I said. "And I finally understand what that costs, and I'm done paying it." He looked at me for a long time, not calculating risk, just looked, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't expected to find interesting. "Then let's see if the system is ready for you." It wasn't. We started anyway. Before the year turned, before the pandemic declaration, before I understood what we were actually fighting. "There is a body camera recording I need you to see." It was flagged for behavioral analysis and forwarded to my operations center 11 months into the outbreak with a handwritten note that said only, "Watch this." I watched it 11 times, and I included it in every briefing I gave from that point forward. I'm including it here because nothing I can tell you about strategy or supply chains or the mechanics of what I built will mean anything if you don't first understand what was in that hallway. Marcus Webb, 26 years old, 8 months on the job as a paramedic. He died the following week in a different building on a similar call. His body camera was never recovered. Timestamp: 6:14 a.m. A residential street, pre-dawn gray. Marcus is responding to a reported screaming, possible medical emergency. The screaming had stopped by the time he arrived. He pushes into the lobby. Empty. Lights on. A child's pink sneaker sitting upright in the center of the tile floor. Just one, placed there like someone had set it down deliberately. Marcus passes it without stopping. He takes the stairs. Third floor. A woman named Carla Reyes is pressed flat against the hallway wall, still in her nightgown, both hands over her mouth. Her eyes are fixed on something at the end of the corridor. She sees Marcus, and her face does something complicated. Relief and terror at once. She mouths at him, "Don't make noise. It's still in there." Marcus slows. The camera turns toward the end of the hallway. A door is open, apartment 3F. From inside, deliberate movement. Methodical. Not the low, rhythmic hunger that everyone had by now learned to recognize and fear. Something quieter. Something that sounded like it was looking for something specific. Carla pulls him close, lips at his ear. "It was my neighbor, David. He came to my door at 3 in the morning, and I almost let him in. I looked at his hands, and his hands were—" She stops, because the movement inside 3F has stopped. 3 seconds of silence. Then, something is standing just inside the threshold, in the shadow, the shape of a man, the size of a man, a stillness that isn't the stillness of waiting, it's the stillness of something that has located a sound and is now processing the information. The head tilts. Carla makes a sound, barely audible, involuntary, the tiniest intake of breath. That's all it takes. It comes through the doorway fast, not the explosive sprint of the early infected, something more controlled, something that has learned that corridors are narrow and speed needs managing in tight spaces. It moves like it has done this before. Marcus grabs Carla and runs. 12 seconds of footage, camera shaking, her hand locked around his sleeve, footsteps behind them gaining in a way that doesn't make sense for a hallway this short. He hits the stairwell door with his shoulder and pulls it shut behind them and holds it. 8 seconds of him holding the door, then the handle turns from the other side. Slowly, deliberately, the way you'd turn a handle if you were trying not to make noise. Carla sees it, her mouth opens, nothing comes out. The handle releases. 15 seconds of silence that is somehow worse than everything before it. Then footsteps, moving away, unhurried. Marcus and Carla stayed in that stairwell for 4 minutes without moving. When they finally left, they went down. They went out. They didn't speak. Carla Reyes survived. I checked. She was evacuated 3 days later. The part I could not stop thinking about was not the door handle. It was the 15 seconds of silence after the handle released. It had stopped. It had assessed. It had decided that waiting was more useful than pursuing. That's not hunger. Hunger doesn't wait. I had a ring full of spring water and 3 months of preparation and every strategic advantage a person could ask for, and the thing in apartment 3F was already learning. Full pandemic declaration, Tuesday morning. I'd been awake since Saturday. The cities fell in an almost architectural pattern, the zombies finding stress points in urban structure the way water finds cracks, patient and methodical, and completely without mercy. But here's what the news couldn't capture, what the briefings kept getting wrong, what I watched happen on surveillance footage at 3 in the morning while everyone else in the operations center grabbed an hour of sleep. They were getting smarter. Not individually. Each zombie, alone, was operating on something below thought, reflex and hunger, and a directionality that had replaced everything the person used to be. But together, collectively, across cities with no possible communication between them, the swarms were developing patterns. They stopped clustering at obvious barriers and started probing edges, looking for gaps. In 3 cities on 2 continents, documented independently by teams who had no contact with each other, zombie clusters were recorded waiting at defended perimeters, actually waiting, stationary, for hours, and surging specifically at the 30-second gap created by defender shift rotations. They couldn't think, but whatever they were becoming could. I had seen the proof of it already, the door handle turning in apartment 3F, the 15 seconds of silence that followed. That footage lived in my briefings. It lived in my head. Now it was living in the streets.
In the rural zones, mutations were appearing. A variant in the south had developed something that looked on infrared footage like coordinated hunting behavior. 2 or 3 zombies would drive a survivor toward a fourth that had positioned itself at a choke point. Our field team started calling them herders, often enough to cost us people who had survived everything else. We were not fighting a disease. We were fighting something that was becoming something else, and we were in a race to finish the cure before it finished becoming. I sent that footage to every task force commander with a single note at the top in large letters. They are timing your rotations. Change your patterns every 12 hours. Some of them did. The ones who didn't lost people. Jane had found her audience. She called the vaccine program a control mechanism. She called me a government asset who had traded one criminal enterprise for another. The emotional core stayed constant. We are being managed. They are not protecting you. The woman at the center of this is not your savior.
I wanted to feel contempt. What I actually felt, reading those reports at 2 a.m. while casualty numbers updated on the screen beside me, was a specific and exhausting grief. Because I could hear her underneath the ideology. The real Jane, the one I'd known for years. And what I heard was a woman who had been in pain for a very long time and had finally found a pain large enough to justify the size of her rage. I kept moving the pipeline. The new strain hit 14 months in. Different resistance. The vaccine suppressed, but didn't cure. It needed spring water, processed and integrated as a final catalyst. Without it, managed illness. With it, complete recovery. The demand immediately exceeded what I could safely provide. The first time I overused it, I woke at 2:47 a.m. with blood on my pillow. I sat on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes in the dark, towel pressed to my face, doing arithmetic. The blood stopped, but the message was delivered, and I understood it. I passed out twice in the following month, once in a government briefing, mid-sentence, once in a parking lot. Went down hard enough to need 3 stitches above my eyebrow. The conversations started in rooms I wasn't invited to. Documents with language like controlled access, sustainable extraction protocols, and national security asset management. They meant, take the ring. Noah found out about the third proposal, the one with actual legal backing, and came to find me, and for the first time since I'd known him, the composure was simply gone. He paced the length of the room 3 times before saying anything. "I'm scared I'm not going to be enough," he said. It came out rough, like it had forced its way through something. This was a man who had held steady through 14 months of catastrophe, and he was standing in front of me, telling me he was scared. "You've held it this long," I said. Inadequate. I knew it was inadequate. "That's not an answer." "I know." He blocked the third proposal. I don't know everything he put on the table to do it. What I found out 2 days later from my own sources, he'd been formally notified of an internal affairs review, the kind that doesn't end careers cleanly, just bends them until they're unrecognizable. I didn't say thank you. I didn't have a version of thank you that was large enough. I just nodded, and he nodded, and we went back to work. But he stayed in the room for an extra moment before leaving. Didn't say anything, just stood there, close enough that I was aware of him in a way I hadn't let myself be aware of anyone in a very long time. Then he left. I pretended not to notice. I noticed. And then Jane broke everything. Not the villa. That came later. First, the distribution center. She'd been building toward it for weeks. Her network had mapped our civilian distribution hubs, the community centers, the converted warehouses where processed cure was staged before final delivery. She'd found the one that mattered most, the Meridian Hub. 14 cities supply, 62 hours of treatment capacity, the central node for the entire Eastern Corridor. Her cell hit it on a Thursday at 4 a.m. It was 10:17 in the morning when I found out.
I was in the operations center working through distribution projections when Maya, our primary analyst, 23 years old, the most methodical thinker I've worked with before or since, came to stand in the doorway of my office. She stood there for 2 seconds without speaking. I had learned that 2 seconds from Maya meant something was wrong at a scale she didn't have immediate language for. "Secondary analysis came back," she said, quietly, like she was still hoping saying it aloud would reveal it as a mistake. "On the Eastern Corridor patients from the last 18 hours. I put down what I was holding. "The treatment is inert." She said it quietly, like she was still hoping saying it aloud would reveal it as a mistake. "All of it. The entire Meridian supply."
Something was introduced to the building's water system. It interacts with the processed cure at the molecular stage, makes it look fine, test fine, administer fine, and then it does nothing. The room was very quiet. "How long?" I said. "We distributed for 18 hours before the first confusion reports came in, before we flagged it, ran secondary." She stopped. 18 hours of distribution to 14 cities. I read the report twice. I put it down. Noah was across the room, and he saw my face, and he came over without me calling him, and he read it over my shoulder, and then we both just stood there for a moment in this specific silence of people confronting a number that doesn't fit inside their capacity for response. 14 cities. 62 hours of treatment capacity. Gone. And every patient who had received contaminated treatment in those 18 hours, their immune response now primed against an inert compound, the real treatment would be partially rejected. They would need higher doses. Higher doses. From a spring that was already running low. "Tell me there's another way," Noah said. "I'm looking," I said. I looked for 4 hours. Every brilliant mind we could access all pointed at the same question. There wasn't another way. I had to choose. I chose the contaminated patients, the ones already fighting. I increased their doses to compensate, drew more than I should have at one time, and accepted that 3 active case regions would go uncovered for 11 days, while I recovered enough to treat them. 11 days. 412 additional infections in the unserved regions. 412 people who would not have been infected if Jane hadn't made that choice. I carry that number. I'm going to carry it for the rest of my life. After I got the final contaminated patient treated, I sat in a supply closet in the operations center for 20 minutes by myself, and I allowed myself to feel exactly what I felt. Then I went back out. The villa live stream came 6 weeks later. She walked through the rooms like a prosecutor. She gave a speech in the kitchen that took genuine grievances, real failures in the government's handling of the outbreak, real inequities in access, and threaded her own rage through them so skillfully you couldn't separate the legitimate from the personal. She was at the peak of it, building toward her close, voice rising, hands raised, when the door came in. 4 minutes from triangulation to entry, the feed was still live. It caught her face in the exact half second before the entry, when she heard the vehicles outside, when her body understood before her mind did, when she knew. What I expected, performance, a final statement for the camera. What I saw, exhaustion. Profound, structural, to-the-bone exhaustion. Like the engine running her had simply stopped. "You were nothing without me." Her voice cracked. Actually cracked. Jane's voice. The voice that had never cracked in 20 years I'd known her. "You are nothing before I—" Outside. Feed cut. Empty kitchen. I watched it twice. The second time, I stopped on that half second of exhaustion. That expression wasn't the face of someone who had lost. It was the face of someone who had been failing at something for a long time and had finally been permitted to stop. She needed someone to stop her.
She had my number the entire time. She never used it. I grieved her. Not the betrayal, the waste. All that intelligence, all that capability, all that fierce and blazing will aimed at the wrong thing for the wrong reason until it burned her down, and 412 people paid the bill. I closed the folder.
The call request came 11 days after the arrest. I was in the operations center working through the recovery draws for the regions that had gone dark during Meridian. My security liaison knocked on the doorframe and stood there with an expression that told me he'd been rehearsing whatever he was about to say. "There's a call request. From the detention facility. Inmate Westhall." He paused. "She asks specifically that I relay the wording." He looked at the paper in his hand. "She said to tell you she wants to talk to her sister." The room was quiet. I kept my eyes on the screen in front of me. "Tell her no," I said. He nodded. He left. I sat there for a moment after he was gone. Just a moment. Long enough to feel the full weight of that word, sister, arriving now from a detention facility, deployed like a tool when everything else had failed. She had called me a gutter-born survivor in the street while I was dying, and the word she chose when the walls closed in was the one word that knew exactly where I lived. That was Jane. Even now, the smartest person in the room she was in. But I kept coming back to it. At night, the ring cold against my sternum, I ran the arithmetic of those 20 years, the real arithmetic, not the strategic version. She had known, I realized. She had always known the word mattered. That was the point. Jane didn't use weapons she wasn't certain of. She had been carrying that word, sister, for 20 years, polishing it, understanding its exact weight, knowing precisely what it would cost me to hear it and say no. The question I sat with, alone in the dark, was whether she had ever meant it. Not now, not from the prison phone, but once, at some point in 20 years, had she meant it? I thought about the night she'd found me on my kitchen floor, 3 months after I'd bankrupted the shipping magnate. Exhausted and sick from the sustained effort of it, she'd let herself in with her key. She'd made soup from what was in my refrigerator, which was very little. She'd sat with me on the floor because I couldn't make it to the couch, and she'd talked. Not about me, not about work, just talked. Easy and low, about something she'd read, something that had made her laugh, something irrelevant and warm. She hadn't asked if I was okay. She'd just sat there until I fell asleep, and in the morning she was gone and the dishes were clean. That woman had meant it. The woman who stood in a doorway and watched me go down while saying, "I refuse to kneel to a gutter-born survivor." I don't know how much of that woman was left by the end. I don't know at what point the structural crack in her became the whole foundation. I don't know if there's a moment I could have found, a conversation I could have had, something I could have done differently that would have changed the load-bearing story she built around her own humiliation. I thought about requesting the callback, sitting across from her in a detention facility room with a table between us, and letting her explain whatever she needed to explain. I sat with that for a long time. Then I thought about the Meridian hub at 4 a.m., about Maya standing in the doorway with that expression, about the arithmetic of 412 people, about the fact that Jane had my number the whole time. She could have called. She had chosen not to. That's not a person who got lost and needed finding. That's a person who made a series of choices, each one confirmed by the last, until the choices had become who she was. I had spent 20 years loving someone who would, given the right conditions, watch me die. I was not obligated to spend one more. I turned back to the screen. The calculations were waiting. The work was waiting. I went back to it. But I thought about the soup. I let myself think about it. I did not tell myself not to. That much I kept. The final months moved differently, not slower. If anything, the pace increased. We were in the closing stages, the hardest cases, the communities most isolated, the strains most adapted. But there was a different quality to the work. The network was running on its own momentum, the difference between fighting a war and finishing one.
The last cluster was coastal, remote, a fishing community on a peninsula that had been cut off in the third week of the outbreak. No resupply, no evacuation, no contact for 8 months, and the strain had evolved in complete isolation. By the time we reached them, it was fourth or fifth generation, specific to their particular immune architecture. The spring had very little left. The warmth in the ring had been fading for weeks, incrementally, undramatically, the way daylight fades at the end of autumn. Not gone, just less. Each draw cost more. I was sleeping more than I ever had in my life, and waking up feeling like I'd been running. My hands shook sometimes in the morning. I didn't tell Noah about the shaking. The day we treated the last case, I drew the last of what the spring had. The confirmation didn't come immediately. It came after 47 minutes of radio silence. The fishing community had a church at the center, stone walls, heavy doors, high windows, and that's where the survivors had been holding for 8 months. 18 people inside, somewhere between 60 and 80 zombies outside. The final cluster evolved in complete isolation. They didn't move like anything Noah's team had encountered before. They were quieter. The other clusters had always been loud. These ones weren't making that sound. They were standing at the edges of the churchyard in a loose ring, almost still, heads slightly tilted. The team's point man said it looked less like a siege and more like something waiting for the right moment to make a decision. The moment came when Noah's team breached the outer perimeter. They moved as one, not a surge, a coordinated collapse inward from 3 sides simultaneously, cutting off the retreat route before the team had finished registering that they were moving at all. One of them, a woman in the remnants of a yellow rain slicker, hit the lead officer so hard he left the ground. 2 more came over a low stone wall that everyone had assessed as secure. Noah's team had changed their rotation pattern that morning, following protocol. These final evolved things that had spent 8 months learning the rhythms of 18 trapped survivors had already adjusted to the new pattern. They had watched it for exactly as long as they needed to. 3 minutes of pure violence. Noah took a hit to his left shoulder that he wouldn't tell me the full extent of until 2 days later. 2 team members went down and got back up. The formula was administered in the last 90 seconds of the fight, with zombies still in contact range because waiting was no longer an option. The first survivor to receive it was a 12-year-old girl who had been inside those stone walls for 8 months. She was the last zombie cured on Earth. She just didn't know it yet. I want to describe what that felt like, and I want to be accurate, which means I need to tell you something I've never said to anyone. I cried. Not during. During, I was focused, drawing the right amount, maintaining the process, keeping the clinical part of my brain in charge because it had to be. But after the draw was done and the transfer was made, and I was standing in the operations center waiting for the field confirmation, something shifted in my chest, and I turned away from the monitoring stations, and I put my back against the wall, and I pressed my hand over the ring, and I cried. Not from sadness, not from relief. From the weight of it. 2 years of weight leaving at once. All the bathroom floors and the blackouts and the government meetings and the bodies and the reports with numbers that don't fit inside human comprehension. All the things I'd held steady because someone had to, and I was the one who had the thing that made me the one who had to. All of it. Releasing. The ring went cold against my hand while I was standing there. Not gradually. One moment warm, the next, ordinary metal. The spring was gone. The parallel space closed, the way a door closes, complete, final, and with the particular silence of something that was always going to close. I straightened up just before Noah's voice came over the comms. "All clear," he said. "Last confirmed case treated, responding well. No further active presence in range." A pause. "It's done, Ruth." I couldn't talk for a second. "Yeah," I said. He came back 40 minutes later. The room had mostly cleared, people filtering out in 1s and 2s, some shaking hands, some just sitting down on the steps outside, needing air. He came and stood beside me at the window, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, which neither of us addressed, which said everything, and we both looked out at the city for a while. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it. Actually took the time to locate the answer. "Like I finished something," I said, "and the part of my brain that's been planning the next thing for 2 years hasn't gotten the news yet. It's still running. It'll catch up." He was quiet for a moment. "The models," he said, "before you came to that parking lot, they ran the projections afterward for a natural course. No spring, no advanced distribution, just standard outbreak response." "I know," I said. "I read them. 10 years minimum, 200 to 300 additional deaths. Conservative estimate." I didn't say anything. No sentence is adequate for that number. "You did that," he said. "You specifically." "We did it," I said. "You held the road I built things on. That's not a small thing." He turned to look at me. He was trying not to cry, not entirely succeeding. I didn't say anything. I let it be what it was. After a while, he collected himself. "What do you want?" he asked. Not "what do you plan to do?" just "want." Like it was a question I was allowed to have a simple answer to. I took the ring off the cord for the first time in 27 years. Held it in my palm. Looked at it. Plain silver, slightly worn. The engraving on the inside gone dark and ordinary with everything else. My grandmother's ring. The only thing that had survived the flood. The only thing that had survived all of it. I put it on my finger. Just wore it. Like a ring. Like a normal thing a person does. Sleep. And then figure out how to rebuild supply chains for a world that just lost a decade of infrastructure. Because someone's going to do it, and most of them are going to do it wrong. He laughed. A real one. Short and genuine. The kind that sounds like something releasing. It was the best sound I had heard in 2 years. We walked out into a morning that was gray and cold and smelled like ordinary rain. I wasn't the mafia queen. I wasn't a national security asset. I was a woman with a plain silver ring on her finger and 2 years of weight off her shoulders and an entire broken world spread out in front of her, waiting to be rebuilt. The ring was cold. The world was broken. We got to work.
The end.